The wind howled across the sun-scorched savanna, but it was a different sound, a desperate, guttural roar that sliced through the silence like a knife. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't a victory cry. It was a plea. Somewhere in the thorny underbrush, hidden from the world and dying slowly, the last breath of a once proud lioness rose with the dust. It was a final roar for help. And someone miles away heard it. Her name had once been Michelle, Swahili for arrow. Fast, fierce, sleek. The leader of her pride. Queen of the western ridge where the grasslands met the stones. That was before the rains stopped coming, before poachers carved scars into her world, and before the hunger set in like a second skin. Now, ribs visible through fur and flies clinging to open wounds, Michelle lay curled beneath a brittle acacia tree, barely breathing. A bullet wound, old and festering, throbbed in her hind leg. A tangled steel snare cut into her front paw, turning her once majestic stride into a dragging limp. The pride she once led had long since scattered, fleeing starvation and fear. She was alone, but not defeated. She summoned what little strength remained and threw her head back. The roar that ripped from her throat was hoarse and broken, more breath than sound, but it traveled. Through wind, through bush, through heart. It was the sound that reached a battered two-way radio in a dusty outpost 30 kilometers away. And on the other end of that radio someone froze. "You heard that?" asked Zuri, her voice low but urgent. Her partner, Caleb, nodded slowly, eyes narrowing as he turned toward the direction of the sound. Zuri had worked with Lionheart rescues for nearly 6 years. She tracked lions across poisoned waterholes and outwitted smugglers on the edge of international borders. She knew every type of lion's call, aggression, warning, mating, but this one carried something different. Desperation. "It's a distress roar," she whispered. "And it's close." They didn't wait for backup. Experience had taught them time was never a luxury in this work. Injured animals didn't have the grace of time, not with infection, predators, or poachers closing in. They grabbed their field packs, medical kits, tranquilizers, camera drones, emergency rations, and loaded into the old Land Cruiser. As the engine coughed to life, Zuri punched the dash, then looked out toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, something was holding on. The sun was nearly gone when they reached the coordinates Caleb had estimated based on sound triangulation. Still, the heat clung to the air like a fever. The terrain here was rugged, cracked from drought, dotted with bone-dry trees and forgotten paths. Drones flew overhead, scanning from above, their silent rotors humming like insects. Zuri stared at the screen looking for anything out of place. A broken branch. A blood trail. A limp shadow in motion. There. Caleb pointed. Northwest ridge. Movement. Zuri zoomed in. A slow, dragging motion. A tail twitch. And eyes, golden but dim. The kind of eyes that once ruled a kingdom now struggling to stay open. They approached cautiously. Tranquilizer darts ready. The Land Cruiser crept over the rocks until they were close enough to see her. Michelle didn't run. Couldn't. But her ears flattened and she growled, a rumble so soft it was more breath than warning. Zuri stepped out slowly, hands low, body language calm. "You're not done yet, girl," she said gently. "Not if we can help it." It took both of them to safely dart and sedate her. As the tranquilizer kicked in, Michelle slumped with a deep sigh, like even her bones were tired of holding her up. Zuri knelt beside her, running gloved fingers over the lioness's body, taking quick notes. Emaciated. Severe dehydration. Snare on right forepaw cutting deep. Gunshot wound rear flank. Probably from poachers. Infection spreading. Caleb was already unpacking the medical kit. They worked fast, flushing the wounds, cleaning away infection, stabilizing her with 4 fluids and antibiotics. The smell was unbearable, death mixed with dust, but neither of them flinched. They'd seen worse. And this lioness wasn't just a rescue. She was a survivor. They needed to get her to the sanctuary fast. By the time they arrived at Lionheart Sanctuary, night had fallen. Michelle was still sedated, draped gently across the modified rescue stretcher. A small team of veterinary staff waited by the gates. "Vitals?" one of them asked. "Stable but weak," Zuri replied. "The snares caused necrosis around the paw. She's septic. Leg might not be salvageable. But we're not giving up," Caleb added firmly. "She wants to live." They transferred her to the quarantine enclosure. Inside, clean straw lined the floor and soft lighting replaced the harsh sun. Here she would be safe. No poachers. No predators. Just care and maybe, if her strength returned, hope. Zuri stayed beside her cage long after the others left. She watched Michelle's chest rise and fall in shallow breaths, listened to the soft beeping of monitors, and remembered the roar. That wasn't just a sound of pain. It was a request. A call that someone somewhere would answer. And they had. 6 days earlier, a trail of silence. Far away from the sanctuary, something darker had been happening. Something silent. 3 lions, 2 male siblings and a female cub, had disappeared from the Nalongo Reserve. Their GPS collars had stopped transmitting. Poaching was suspected, but no evidence was found. Just a few drops of blood near a broken fence line. Rangers had been searching for days. They found nothing. Until one stumbled upon a snare field, hidden in the shadow of an old tree line. Empty. Recently used. No bodies. Zuri had heard about it. Everyone had. And when she saw Michelle, alone, wounded, dragging her way away from that area, a horrible thought had settled in her mind. She wasn't just fleeing death. She had seen it. Back in the sanctuary, the fight begins. Michelle awoke groggy, flinching at the unfamiliar surroundings. Her paw was bandaged. The infected leg had been drained, stitched, and flushed with every antibiotic they had access to. She was eating barely, drinking more. But she was still on the edge. Zuri visited her every morning. Sat beside the enclosure. Spoke softly. Shared updates on other rescues. Read from an old journal of field notes. And always she looked into Michelle's eyes, searching for that spark. "I know you're tired," she whispered one morning, watching the lioness twitch in her sleep. "But you fought your way out. You roared when you had no voice left. You found us. Now you've got to stay." Caleb had started calling her the queen without a crown. But Zuri saw something else. "She's not without it," she said. "She buried it. For now." Signs of life. By the end of the second week there were changes. Michelle stood on her own, wobbly but upright. She accepted food from a bowl placed inside the gate. She no longer growled when Zuri came close. And then one morning, Zuri saw her do something extraordinary. The lioness limped to the far corner of the enclosure, stared through the fencing at the horizon, and lifted her chin. She didn't roar. Not yet. But her eyes burned gold again. And Zuri smiled. "She's coming back," she said. "She's not done." Michelle stood still in the corner of her enclosure, gazing at the line where sky met earth. The wind stirred her mane, thin, patchy in places, but stubbornly clinging to dignity. Her frame trembled under its own weight, but she stood. That meant something. Zuri watched from the observation deck above, arms folded, heart thudding. The monitors on her tablet showed stable vitals. No signs of fever. Appetite slowly returning. The sedatives had cleared her system, but painkillers and antibiotics still coursed through her veins. She was healing, but there was a long road ahead. "She's watching for something," Caleb said, stepping beside her with a thermal scan printout. "Maybe the pride." Zuri didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed on the lioness, but her mind was somewhere else, on a blood-stained snare field and a broken pride that hadn't been seen since. "She didn't just crawl out of death," she finally said. "She crawled out of something." Inside the sanctuary's medical unit. Down below, Michelle's treatment wasn't just physical. The sanctuary's vet, Dr. Kamari, had started a slow reconditioning protocol, gentle stimulation, enrichment activities, and exposure therapy to rebuild her trust in her environment. "She's got PTSD," Kamari explained during the daily roundtable with the team. "Classic signs: disorientation, occasional aggression, hypervigilance. Her body's healing, but her mind. She's trapped in whatever she saw out there," Zuri finished. Kamari nodded. "And if we don't help her escape it, her recovery will stall." They changed her environment gradually. Introduced padded scratching posts. Left trails of blood-scented ice cubes to stimulate hunting instinct. Played distant lion calls to gauge her reaction. She didn't flinch. Didn't move. Just watched. Until day 18. The day she moved. That morning, the sanctuary was humming with quiet activity. Zuri walked the perimeter, checking the updated camera feeds and monitoring her team's notes. As she passed Michelle's enclosure, something froze her mid-step. The lioness wasn't in her corner. Zuri rushed to the viewing window, and her breath caught in her throat. Michelle was pacing. It wasn't much. 10 steps forward, 10 steps back. A slow, measured circuit. But it was movement. Intentional. Purposeful. "She's testing herself," Kamari said behind her, watching through binoculars. "And you know what's crazy?" "What?" "She's not limping as much anymore." Zuri's eyes dropped to the ground. Michelle's bandaged paw still pressed carefully on the earth, but her gait had improved. There was stability, balance, and something else, fire. She's fighting, Zuri whispered. Every second, the poacher trail widens. Meanwhile, Caleb had been digging into something darker. He'd returned to the site where the snare had nearly claimed Michelle's life. What he found wasn't just remnants of a poacher's trap, it was a network. Fresh tire tracks, cans of baited meat, a folded tarp with traces of lion blood. More disturbing, he found a small transmitter. Not GPS, not a tag, a jammer, designed to block tracking collars. He brought it back to the sanctuary and laid it out on the briefing table. They're getting smarter, he said. They're blocking the trackers before taking the cats. That's why the pride vanished. It wasn't just bad luck, they were taken. Zuri's stomach turned. And Michelle got out. Barely. What if she saw who did it? The room fell silent. A night visitor. That night, Zuri returned to Michelle's enclosure. She sat quietly outside the fence, a lantern at her side, wrapped in a thermal blanket as the cold crept in. The lioness had curled herself near the rear corner again, her body half-shadowed. Zuri spoke softly. I know it's in there. What you saw. What you remember. But if you found your way back to us, there's got to be a reason. She slid a tablet under the gate, loaded with footage from a hidden camera placed near the snare field. It showed vultures circling. A van parked beneath a dead tree. 2 silhouettes dragging something heavy. I need you to tell me, Zuri said. Not with words. With instincts. The next morning when they retrieved the tablet, there were claw marks on the screen, angry, precise, focused. She remembered, building her strength brick by brick. Over the following week, the sanctuary's plan shifted. Michelle wasn't just a rescue now. She was a key witness, possibly the only living one, to an operation snatching apex predators under the radar. So they trained her, fed her rich proteins, helped her swim to rebuild muscle without pressure on her injured leg, planted simulation challenges in her enclosure, moving targets, hidden meat, mock prey. And she rose to them. Her coat thickened. Her eyes sharpened. She learned the paths of her small kingdom and walked them like a queen again. One morning she stood in the center of the enclosure and gave a deep, rolling sound, not quite a roar but not far off. Zuri's heart clenched. She's calling. A plan unfolds. We use her, Caleb said. Carefully. Strategically. If she remembers where they took her pride, maybe she can lead us back. Zuri hesitated. She's not bait. No, he agreed. She's a compass. The idea was bold, maybe reckless, a soft release. Let Michelle back into the wild under controlled conditions. Camouflage drones watching from above, hidden trackers sewn into her collar, a mobile vet team ready to intervene if necessary. But Zuri knew it had to be her choice. So she opened the gate. No coaxing. No force. Michelle stood on the threshold of the enclosure, eyes locked with Zuri's. For a full minute, neither moved. Then the lioness stepped forward. Back to the wild. They followed her for days. Through ravines and ghosted watering holes. Through plains of dust and brittle grass. Michelle moved with direction, not haste, not fear. She wasn't running. She was returning. On the 5th day she stopped. A rocky outcrop. Blood stains on the ground, faded but unmistakable. A broken collar buried beneath the soil. Caleb picked it up and cursed softly. It belonged to one of the missing males, Django, the pride's younger brother. Michelle didn't look at them. She just stared at the rocks. And then she did something Zuri would never forget. She roared. Not in pain. In fury. It echoed across the landscape like thunder from a dead sky. The trap is sprung. They didn't have to wait long. That night, motion sensors triggered near a dried stream bed just south of the outcrop. A vehicle. Lights off. 2 figures unloading meat near a metal trap. Caleb and Zuri moved fast, flanking with thermal drones and rangers from the reserve. The poachers never saw it coming. By dawn, 2 men were in custody. Satellite phones recovered. Ledgers documenting the sale of lion parts across borders. Dozens of names, buyers, intermediaries, locations. And most chilling of all, coordinates of a holding compound where captured animals were kept before being smuggled out. Zuri stared at the notes in horror. This is organized trafficking, she said. Not just poaching. This is industrial. But not all was lost. The compound was raided 2 days later with wildlife authorities. Inside they found cages. Rusted, filthy, lined with bones and fear. But in one cage, huddled and gaunt, were 2 lions. 1 male. 1 female cub. Zuri gasped. It was them. Michelle's pride. Reunion. They brought the lions to the sanctuary. Both were malnourished and terrified, but otherwise uninjured. When Michelle was led into the adjoining enclosure, she paused. Her nostrils flared. Her eyes widened. Then she ran. As best she could. She pressed against the divider gate, rumbling deep in her chest. The cub cried out. Django stood, ears forward, tail low. And for the first time in weeks, the pride touched noses through the bars. Together again. Not broken. Not gone. Survivors. Zuri watched from above, tears in her eyes. She didn't just come back for help, she said. She came back to lead us home. The sun rose like fire behind the hills, casting long gold fingers across the sanctuary. In the warm light of morning, 3 lions lay side by side. They didn't touch, not yet, but they were close. Close enough to hear each other's breath. Close enough to remember. Zuri sat quietly on the watch deck above their enclosures, knees tucked to her chest, coffee forgotten in her hands. She hadn't slept much, and neither had Caleb. None of the team had. After the raid, the recovery, the names found in that ledger, there was too much to process. Too much darkness. But beneath her, curled in the straw, was something bright. Michelle. The lioness who refused to die. Who remembered not just pain but home. Who dragged herself out of the killing fields to lead them, the humans, back to the ones they couldn't save alone. She didn't just survive, Zuri murmured, almost in awe. She mapped the whole way out. 3 days after the reunion. Django and the cub, whom the sanctuary named Kia, were responding well. Django had fresh wounds, defensive slashes on his back and neck, likely from fighting off other captured males. Kia had minor malnutrition but no major injuries. What she did have was fear. Loud noises sent her scrambling. Sudden shadows made her freeze. She flinched at human voices. But when Michelle approached the fence, Kia ran to her every time. And stayed there. Zuri watched Michelle press her face to the divider and gently groom the cub through the bars. She's raising her again, she said. She never stopped, Caleb replied. Even when they tore them apart. The bigger picture. While the lions healed, the team dug deeper into the trafficking ring. Every piece of evidence recovered from the poacher's ledger fed a map on the mission board, a red web of names, coordinates, and shipping routes stretching across borders. Caleb briefed the team in the sanctuary's operations tent. Here's what we've confirmed. The compound where we found Django and Kia was just one of 4. They're using them as temporary holding pens, break lions from each other, calm them, then smuggle them out through fake wildlife export licenses. They're trading them like livestock, Zuri said, her voice tight with fury. Worse. They're selling them in parts. Pelts, teeth, bones, tails. For black market medicine, decor, trophies. Dr. Kamari slammed a clipboard onto the table. We lost 9 lions in just 1 month from the Nalongo Reserve alone. The trackers didn't malfunction. They were jammed. These people are ghosts. Not anymore, Caleb said. Michelle's roar lit the fuse. We've got names, coordinates, connections. Now we burn their network down. Hard decisions. But the team faced a difficult question. What to do with the pride now? Michelle had made a stunning recovery, but she still bore signs of trauma. Her paw was scarred. She limped after long walks. Django too had changed. He was wary. Watchful. No longer the bold young lion of the western ridges. And Kia? She was still growing, still learning to trust again. Dr. Kamari was cautious. They're bonded. Stronger together. But putting them back in the wild means putting them back at risk. Poachers, territorial fights, climate stress. Are we sure they're ready? Zuri stared at the 3 lions curled together in the soft light of late afternoon. Michelle had placed herself between the other 2 like a sentry. She brought them back from the dead, Zuri said. And she did it on her own. If anyone's earned a choice. She left the sentence unfinished. They all knew. It was Michelle's call. A visitor from the shadows. 2 nights later, the sanctuary received an unexpected guest. A quiet knock on the gate. A flash of a badge. A man in a dark uniform, eyes shadowed beneath his cap. Zuri met him in the main lodge. Ranger Duma, he said, handing over credentials. Nalongo Special Wildlife Task Force. You raided one of our targets. We rescued the lions your department lost, Caleb snapped. Duma didn't flinch. I'm here because I'm on your side. Officially? You overstepped. Unofficially? You saved lives. He laid a satellite map on the table and pointed. Here. Remote airstrip. No registered flights. But we've tracked suspicious activity. 2 more lions were loaded onto a plane 3 nights ago. Zuri's stomach dropped. More? It doesn't stop unless we make it stop. He turned to her fully. You've got the bait. You've got the story. And thanks to that lioness, he paused, you've got the symbol. A dangerous plan. That night the idea formed. Not just another rescue. A trap. They'd leak intel, just enough to draw the poachers back. A false auction. A staged sale of Michelle, dressed up like an inside job. Only this time the seller would be a fake. A wildlife officer posing as a corrupt exporter. Michelle? She'd be the decoy. Zuri hated the idea. Every part of her rebelled. But she also knew one thing. Michelle would go. Because she remembered. And she wanted them to pay. The final hunt begins. The plan moved fast. Michelle was fitted with a high-frequency collar, undetectable by standard jammers. A microtransmitter hidden beneath her fur. The transport cage was rigged with trackers, cameras, tranquilizer vents. Duma handled the intel leak. A whispered rumor in the right circles. A whisper that a female lion, strong bloodline, good condition, illegal, was available for high-value export. 3 days later they got a bite. The buyer? A broker flagged on 3 continents. Connected to wildlife trafficking in Congo, Vietnam, and Eastern Europe. They set the meeting for a remote exchange site near the northern border. Zuri rode in the second truck. Camouflaged rangers followed on foot. Drone coverage blanketed the site from above. Michelle, sedated lightly but alert, lay in the transport cage. Her eyes were sharp. Focused. Not afraid. Ready. The exchange. The airstrip was quiet at first. Empty. Just dust and wind. Then came the jeep. 2 men. Armed. One had a sat phone. The other opened the back to inspect the merchandise. He bent toward the cage, flashlight shining directly into Michelle's face. She didn't growl. She just stared. Predator to predator. The man stepped back. Said something in a language Zuri didn't catch. He gave a nod. A deal. But as he reached for the cage lock, Duma gave the signal. The sky lit up with drone strobes. Rangers emerged from every angle. Shots. Gunshots into the air. The poachers ran but they didn't get far. 2 were caught. 1 was wounded. 1 got away. But the cage? The cage never moved. Zuri reached it seconds later, breath hitching. Michelle was standing. And she roared. The aftermath. The footage of the operation, poachers caught mid-crime, satellite logs showing illegal air routes, and Michelle's unbroken stance inside the trap, went viral within 48 hours. The lioness who led them back became a headline across news outlets worldwide. Wildlife organizations pledged resources. Interpol issued red notices. And Lionheart Rescues received triple its usual funding in a single week. But Michelle? She didn't care about headlines. She wanted home. A return to the wild. The decision came from her actions, not her keepers. One morning, just days after the operation, Michelle paced the edge of the enclosure, staring at the gate. Over and over. Django joined her. Kia followed. They're ready, Zuri said, watching from the post. She's done her part. Now we do ours. They loaded tranquilizers not to sedate, but to protect. They opened the gates. The 3 lions stepped out, not with hesitation, but with grace. Michelle paused only once at the top of the ridge. She turned, looking straight toward Zuri. A beat. A breath. And then she vanished into the tall grass. The wind rolled across the savanna like a wave of breath, lifting dust and grass in swirling patterns around the sanctuary gate. Zuri stood in the stillness long after the lions had disappeared over the ridge. No sound. No roar. Just silence. But not an empty one. It was the silence of a chapter ending. And a new one beginning. She's really gone, Caleb said behind her, his voice low with awe. Zuri didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, heart aching, but not in the way she expected. Not with grief. With reverence. Because Michelle hadn't left them broken. She had left them whole. 6 weeks later. The Pride's collar signals remained active. Every morning, Zuri pulled up the trackers expecting a blip too far or worse, one that stopped moving entirely. But every day the signals danced. They'd established a territory near the northern ridgeline, far from the original snare fields. Open plains, dense tree lines, seasonal water. Perfect hunting ground. The lioness knew what she was doing. She's not just surviving out there, Caleb said, scanning the map. She's reclaiming it. Michelle had set her boundaries wide, ranging further than expected, as if making it clear, this is ours now. She wasn't rebuilding a pride. She was redefining it. Signs of a new reign. Drone footage showed growing confidence in Kia. Her play had returned, stalking birds, pouncing on leaves, even attempting and failing to ambush a warthog. Django shadowed her constantly. His gait had grown stronger, his muscle mass slowly rebuilding. But it was Michelle who stunned them most. She hunted again. Not as often and never at full speed, but with precision. She coordinated flanks with Django, flushed prey into Kia's path, and waited near kill zones like a seasoned general watching her soldiers train. They were no longer just family. They were a unit. The story spreads. Back at the sanctuary, the world hadn't stopped talking. Footage from the raid, Michelle's roar echoing through the drone mics, and the footage of her stepping through the open gate had reached tens of millions. She became a symbol across conservation networks. News outlets dubbed her the lioness who roared back, the survivor who saved a species, Michelle the matriarch. Documentaries called. Donors flooded in. But Zuri turned down the networks who only wanted sound bites. She had something better planned. Something that could outlast a news cycle. Legacy in motion. Lionheart Rescues launched the Michelle Initiative, a multi-tier effort aimed at dismantling wildlife trafficking networks, starting with the poachers' routes uncovered during the raid. With new funding, they expanded their drone surveillance grid and partnered with border patrols and rangers across 2 countries. Collar jammers? No longer undetectable. Their new tech pinpointed interference within seconds. The cages? Dismantled. The buyers? Named, shamed, arrested. And with each takedown, they added a marker on a digital map. A growing constellation. One Michelle had lit with her final roar. A return trip. 10 weeks after the release, Zuri made the call. Not to interfere. Not to trap. Just to visit. She and Caleb flew a small team via drone chopper to the region where Michelle's pride had settled. They used the collar pings to approach from a distance. No boots on the ground. No fences. Just optics and a single rover with long-lens cameras. Zuri took her seat behind the scope, unsure what to expect. And then, movement. In the tall gold grass, just beyond a rocky outcrop, a shape unfolded. Kia, grown taller, her frame starting to stretch with adolescence. She crept forward, eyes alert, tail flicking. Behind her, Django. And to the left, rising like a monument of muscle and memory, Michelle. She stood still, head high, eyes cast toward the distant rover. Not running. Not hiding. Just seeing. And being seen. Zuri's breath hitched. She pressed a hand to the camera screen. She remembers. Caleb nodded just as choked up. Of course she does. She never forgot. The final confrontation. 3 nights later, the collar alert came. Not from movement, but from sudden stillness. One of the trackers went offline, not Michelle's but Django's. A moment later, the system flagged localized jamming interference. Not again. The sanctuary scrambled. Zuri coordinated with Duma's ranger unit, mobilizing a drone fleet. Within minutes, they locked onto 2 heat signatures closing in on the pride's territory. Poachers. Again. Armed. Confident. Probably thinking the sanctuary had long moved on. They were wrong. Fire and thunder. At 3:42 a.m., the sky erupted over the grasslands. Search drones swept in low, rattling the silence. Tactical teams moved in fast, intercepting just outside the ridgeline. They caught one man with tranquilizer darts and a bolt cutter. The other? He was fleeing straight through the tall grass. Straight toward the pride. Zuri screamed into the mic, "Do not engage the lions." But she was too late. The body cam footage captured it in near silence. The poacher stumbled. Fall. Looked up. And there she was. Michelle. Not charging. Not snarling. Just there. Watching. Her body blocked the path between the man and the cubs behind her. And for the first time on record, a wild lion didn't kill. She simply stood. As if to say, "This is over. You don't belong here anymore." Rangers tackled him seconds later. He lived. But he never forgot her eyes. Peace restored. The raid put the final nail in the poacher syndicate's coffin. With the last of their routes exposed and their men arrested, the regional black market collapsed under pressure from international watchdogs. Interpol issued a formal commendation to the sanctuary team. And Zuri? She stood again at the ridge where she'd once said goodbye. Michelle's signal pulsed steadily on the GPS, alive. Free. Moving forward. Kia now hunted at her mother's side. Django led small patrols near watering holes. They'd become a fixture of the land again. Not in hiding but in command. A roar that never ends. They never recaptured Michelle. Never put her back in a cage. Never tracked her with helicopters again. They didn't need to. Because the lioness who once cried out for help now led her pride without fear. Her roar, that final desperate call in the snare field, had traveled further than anyone could have imagined. It became law. It became reform. It became sanctuary. And above all, it became hope. Back at the sanctuary, Zuri stood in the media room beside a new display, a high-resolution print of Michelle, her mane ruffled by wind, eyes lit with quiet fire. A plaque beneath it read. She roared. And the world listened. Visitors came from everywhere now, children, students, volunteers, journalists, to hear the story. The story of a lioness who remembered pain but chose strength. Who lost everything and fought to find it again. Who refused to disappear. And who taught humanity how to listen when the wild cries out. If Michelle's story moved you, subscribe to Lion's Shield for more powerful true stories of survival, resilience, and hope. Every roar matters. Every rescue counts. And together we can protect those who can't ask for help, but still desperately need it. Never miss the next roar. Join the pride. Subscribe now.